This is JoJo with AICM's Outer Experiences Oral History Project, and it's July 7th. I'm speaking with Clarke Sanders, who grew up in Plymouth. And Clarke, where were you born?
Yeah, so born and raised Plymouth, Minnesota. I've lived in the same home, other than being a young adult and bouncing around with college, but I've lived in the same childhood home for 25 years. My parents have been here, I want to say, for like 30. So we've been in the same place.
Wow. Yeah, that's
yeah.
great. And then, so what year were you born?
Yeah, so I was born in 1995.
All right. And so you mentioned your mother and father. They lived in Plymouth for about 30 years, you said?
Yeah, so, I can get a little into the history of my parents, if that's kind of where it's leading
that'd be
into.
great.
So my mom's actually from southern Minnesota, Fairmont. My mother is white, so she grew up super small town, southern Minnesota, moved to the Twin Cities after college to kind of start pursuing her life and dreams. She's actually 7 years younger than my dad, and so my dad's from Decatur, Illinois, and for college football, he found himself bouncing around to Mizzou, the Ohio State, as you make sure I always say, and then he found himself in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, living with some friends and bouncing around some jobs, and so they actually met each other at a bar that no longer exists. It was called Hula Hands, and it was kind of like my dad, of course, says it was a love at first sight. Both my parents are very tall, so my mom comes walking into this bar, all legs, he said, and so with him, growing up in Decatur, where a lot of his neighbors look like him, my dad's black, and then coming up to Minnesota, it wasn't so much a culture shock as, he's lived in the Midwest, so he understands a lot of the mentalities, but definitely marrying a white woman from southern Minnesota and kind of starting getting integrated into her family, he said was a very interesting process, to say the least. So, yeah.
So did your father come to the cities first, or did he go to Plymouth first when he came from Illinois?
From what I know, he lived in the cities. And then he actually lived, there's an apartment complex that's still around today, it's still a pretty popular one, called Plymouth Ponds. And when my dad was living up here in Plymouth is when he started dating my mom. So, and she lived in Burnsville for a while and then St. Louis Park. And then, they ended up, getting married and buying a house and moving to Plymouth. So a lot of my dad's experience in the Twin Cities area and kind of like in the suburbs has been on like this side of the tracks, if you will. And so for him, he liked the, I guess, quote unquote, peace and quiet that that Plymouth kind of offered. And then for my mom, growing up in a small town and then moving up here, the suburbs were very much like a comfortable place for her. So, yeah.
Coming from Fairmont, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said they got married and then did they buy a house in Plymouth? Is that correct?
They did. So the house that I'm currently sitting in and they're still very much living in has like 30 plus years of a relationship just buried into the bones. And there's stuff everywhere still have our stuff from our childhood to now, and all of my parents like memorabilia and their memories are here. And so, yeah, very much a family house. We've been here for forever, it feels like.
Yeah. Did your father ever mention anything about the home buying process or any of the experiences he had? Were his neighbors welcoming, or did he find any resistance to him moving to Plymouth?
Yeah. So From the story that they told me about their house buying process, especially as I start to get to that age of, looking for where do I want to settle down roots and what does this process look like even now? So 30 years ago, it sounded like my mom pretty much did a lot of the touring. She did a lot of the meetings with, realtors and stuff like that. And so my dad's very much the guy like happy wife, happy life. So he kind of let her make that buying decision. And so when they first moved in, they were one of the only like mixed race families, let alone black families in the neighborhood. I know that my dad, that of course they very much like welcoming to the neighborhood. We've lucked out a lot in our neighborhood being kind of, my dad calls it deckland. We all have our decks out here. We just hang out. We're all just really friendly, and my house was right on the corner of a cul-de-sac. So growing up, it was very neighborly. We were outside a lot. We all kind of live in our little rose-colored bubble out here that a lot of times things don't affect us so much directly, that I think a lot of times like our neighbors and our friends and our families and even sometimes ourselves forget that a lot of these systemic as well as like microaggression things are still very much like blaring in our face. We just, we're kind of like out here in our little house and not much happens. So we get to be like away from it, which is a bit of in my opinion, a bit of a blessing and kind of a curse at the same time, because we can get comfortable, and comfort doesn't always lead to progress. So yeah, our neighbors have always been super welcoming to our family, have always been good friends of ours. Growing up, my neighbors never looked like me. And that wasn't something that my dad really ever talked to our family about. I know for him, he kind of, he got to that point in his life where he's like, I own this nice big house here and I can afford this, and this isn't something I grew up with. And so for him, it was kind of this win, or this staple, if you will, to kind of, I guess, live that kind of American dream, if you will, kind of living the white man's dream in the sense of the stable, beautiful home, a great job, a great neighborhood. So I don't think it was so much a worry or question for him, because he knew he was doing the best that he could for his family.
Right. So that's what he focused on.
Mhm.
So what did your mother and father do while you were growing up for a living?
They still do it. My family's kind of old school. My dad actually is a high school teacher at Champlain Park High School. He has been there since the school opened. So he would probably be a really great person to interview with like teaching in the suburbs and what it looks like starting a school.
Right.
And of course,
and
being
what year
a black
was
teacher.
Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
what year was that?
Let me see. I want to say, so he started teaching, was it 2 years before I was born? So about 28 years ago.
Okay.
So what would that have been, like 93?
Okay.
Yeah, it was like 92, 93, I want to say. Because so I have an older half brother, and he ended up living with my parents. I didn't even mention this. So he lives with my parents when they moved here, and that was part of the reason they wanted to buy a house, was so my brother could come and live with his dad, our dad. And when growing up, he went to the high school with my dad. So he was actually one of the first students there too. So yeah. Going to school with your dad at a new school, I'm sure, has to be its own adventure.
Yeah.
But
and then your mother, what did she do while you were growing up?
So my mom helps people find jobs. She actually works in like the dislocated worker program, primarily working with people that may have been injured in their jobs, so they're unable to, it's harder to find employment, or maybe they have a little bit, I guess for lack of a better term, kind of like unconventional either education or a background. So she works with a lot of people who have English as a second language. She works with a lot of people that maybe, she's worked with a few people that have been incarcerated, as well as have maybe mental health or physical disabilities that, it makes the job search process even that much more difficult. So she helps them find jobs. She works with the state as well as with a couple of different organizations, and she owns her own business. She's a busy lady.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. All right. And then just continuing on kind of some of your family background. So on your dad's side, were your grandparents born, where were they born?
Yeah. I want to say, I know my grandpa's from Oklahoma. Yeah, that's where the Sanders came from. So I'm not 100% sure if my grandma was also there. I never met my grandfather. He had passed away before I was born, actually on both sides. And so our grandmothers were around when we were younger. They both passed away. My mother's mother passed away when I was pretty young. I want to say it was only about 4 or 5. And then my father's mother, she passed away in 2014. So it's been a little bit of time. But growing up, I want to say that my dad grew up in the same childhood home. He lived there with his 6 siblings, him being the youngest of 6. Yeah, so they still will go back from time to time and visit Decatur and visit his old stomping grounds and say hello. But there's not many of us there anymore. They kind of moved everywhere else.
Did your grandmothers ever get a chance to visit you in Plymouth, and did they ever kind of compare and contrast maybe where they grew up?
Yeah, so I know my mother's mom, she very much, that was expected, especially, being white. You grew up, you moved out, and life kind of just takes you kind of whatever direction, right? And so our grandmother came by often, especially since it was only about a 2-hour drive or so, maybe a little over that. So she'd come up from time to time, and even my dad would talk about how him and his mother-in-law were really good friends, and she was the first one that welcomed him into the family with open arms. My grandfather had passed away before he got a chance to meet him, so that he didn't get so much of an experience of, but he said that, it was like she just added another baby to her 7 children that she had, so they're both from big families. But his mother would come up and visit us from time to time before her health kind of started to decline. And I know for her, she was really proud of my dad and, getting out and having this beautiful home and being able to provide for his family in ways that, her generation couldn't necessarily even imagine. It was almost a bit of a dream. And so seeing her son, and happy and with, his beautiful babies, and then she got to come and see how comfortable he was, because even he told me the other day that comfortability was his life goal. That's not something that many Black Americans get to experience, is being comfortable. So that's something he strives for, and the fact that he feels as though he very much has attained it. Of course, there's nuances within it, right? But he feels comfortable, he feels happy, and so I know his mother seeing him happy is her happiness as a mom, So, yeah, that's kind of at least what I remember and a little bit of what they told me. My grandmother ended up living with one of her daughters and her granddaughters as her health declined. And so they were in Chicago and we'd visit often, but I know as her health declined, it was harder and harder for my dad to visit. So we didn't see the side of the family as much. But yeah, she was proud of him.
Yeah, sounds like it. And
Mm-hmm.
earlier you mentioned you said your dad kind of jokingly referred to your neighborhood as like the deck community, I think you
Yes.
said.
Yeah, Deathland.
Yeah, that's land, yes.
Yeah.
So how would you describe or characterize, even Plymouth in general and then
Yeah.
maybe even just like your neighborhood?
Yeah, so in 2004, I want to say it was like 2004 to 2006, Plymouth was actually the number one place in Minnesota to raise a family. Like, I guess they must have done like a survey or something like that. We have great schooling. We have, it's a quiet community, low crime. There's not a whole lot that really happens here. Like, it's really exciting when a new neighbor moves in. It's the neighborhood. You're only seeing turnover when families have their kids that go off to college and like grow up. So we're starting to see a little bit of turnover now. As I'm sitting here 25, many of my neighbors are either around the same age or in their early 30s at this point. So everybody's kind of turning over. Parents are downsizing. We live in a really nice neighborhood. These are 200,000 plus houses. So economically we are middle class out here, upper middle class. And so Plymouth can be notoriously on the wealthy side, but we do have some quote unquote not so great areas. I would argue with any housing, when they say it's a great neighborhood, I mean it's a white neighborhood. And so, it's kind of, I hate to say, like if you ever watch a movie and they're out in the suburbs and everybody's just like, hi neighbors, talking in their driveways and walking their dogs and, with their golden retrievers and their tennis skirts and all that kind of stuff. That's truly kind of what my neighborhood is. We grew up at a time where my neighbors across the street are my age, the neighbors next to us in kitty corner, there's like a whole wave of kids that are our age. So we would all just play in the yards. There would be bikes. You could always tell, whose house we were at because the bikes were in the yard or the driveway, or, we would walk around and you would, never be looking over your shoulder. The whole neighborhood was watching out for you. It was, even the other day, one of the new families, the little girl was biking in our cul-de-sac and she had fallen over and scraped her knee, and it was like the whole neighborhood was watching her. So it was, she could feel comfortable to just like run over and be upset, or, it's very much a community sense. And I had made a comment to one of my friends who grew up on the north side, and I said, there's a lot of similar mentalities here as where she grew up, and how she's like, yeah, I had a very similar experience, but it was a different kind of watching out. Like, it was kind of like watching your back in a little bit of a different sense from the cities versus out here. And I think a lot of that comes with the white experience. Living here, where I would say arguably we're living the white experience with nuances of being black. So when I was younger, it wasn't so blatant. I mean, they say racism's taught, right? So growing up, my neighborhood's very progressive. Pretty much anybody that might have a differing opinion tends to stay a bit quieter. It was, this is my best friend Megan who lives across the street. It didn't matter that she was white and I was black. My neighbors are also Jewish, and so we would all just celebrate each other's differences a little bit. So I very much grew up with rose-colored glasses, for sure. I thought the world was sunshine and sparkles, and everybody just loved everybody.
Right. do you feel there was like a kind of color blindness instead of maybe addressing race that you
Oh,
saw in Plymouth?
absolutely. Absolutely. Really, the only times I would say that those rose-colored glasses would come off as we have a park that's like 3 blocks away from my house that me and my neighborhood friends, we would always walk down to. But, you know, as Plymouth even started to diversify a lot more, we were seeing families, and here's some of that not so much said racism, right, of families deciding to move, or, you know, families talking about how well, there goes the neighborhood, or, the values of houses, quote unquote, declining, and so they felt as though they needed to sell and move now. There are a lot of those things that, especially growing up here, a lot, they would just chalk it to, oh, they're downsizing, or they want to be in a different school district, or whatever it might be. But really, when it came down to it, I feel like a lot of that was rooted in racist beliefs. We've had a couple of incidents of some like shootings and things happen at the park that's down from my house, and more of a situation of some kids shooting up into the air, finding a gun and getting their hands on it, unfortunately. But it never really, I wouldn't necessarily say the community was ever shook. There was always a sense of security. J. Cole even says it, like, in a song, like, they came fast like 911 in white neighborhoods. That's my neighborhood. Like, if something were to happen here, they're there. Like, they're on it. So nobody ever felt a sense of unsafety, I guess. There's just a lot of security that comes with living in the burbs. And you can start, even now, you can feel a bit of that shift as people are really starting to realize how, though we live in this deck land in our rose-colored bubble, that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect our neighbors. I know our neighbors have been so understanding and wanting to hear, how George Floyd's murder has affected us, and how now a lot of this social justice uprising and a lot of this awakening even for our allies, you're seeing it and you're feeling it, luckily, here, but still, I would say not at the even close to the scale of like how the Twin Cities is feeling it, or how like the more urban neighborhoods are feeling it, because they do get to then go back into their homes and not feel affected by this. They still can have that sense of escape. So there's that type of nuance in the neighborhood. But I would say a lot of any sort of racism that we ever feel is very much microaggressions. Everybody thinks that they're progressive out here. They're in the suburbs, they're not super rural folk, or, whatever they may be saying. So they're progressive enough.
Yeah. So you talked about like how you had friends living next to you and you pretty much socialized without any problems. But I do want to ask, kind of about your school experience.
Yeah.
And, if you just want to walk me through, what elementary through high school, I know that's kind of a tall order, is like. And then as you're mentioning it, if you could just also just name the school you're speaking about and maybe around the year and how old you were.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll even start with like my preschool / kindergarten experience. So I went to a Montessori school for preschool and kindergarten. It was called Step by Step Montessori. So that would have been around, it would have been the late 90s. So 98 to about 2000. I went to Step by Step Montessori in Maple Grove, Minnesota. And, growing up, we were all just kids. We had what I would say, especially for the area, was a pretty diverse Montessori school. I mean, as diverse as you can get in Maple Grove. But, growing up, one of my best friends in the school, she was also Black. But I want to say that one of my first, and even the first race encounter that I had at that age was we were making these little paper leprechaun ears for St. Patrick's Day. We were doing some cute crafts for St. Patrick's Day. And so I couldn't have been more than, let's see, if it was 98 to 99. Yeah, I couldn't have been more than like 3 or 4. And that was probably close to that 4 or 5 range at this point. So I want to say probably around 99. I had these, we were making these leprechaun ears, and they were just out of construction paper, and then we were just like cutting stuff, and we were making headbands. And so while, a lot of my friends, a lot of my Black friends would either have their hair slicked back or their hair would be in like braids. And so having Black mothers, their moms would like know what to do with their hair. And so my dad, of course, did what he could, but he gave up on his hair after a while, and he's been bald for as long as I can remember. And my mom, I mean, she has thick, long, wavy hair, but she doesn't have much experience in textured or curly hair. And so, I mean, I have pretty soft curls with being mixed. But still, even right now with all this humidity, my hair is like, So we were making these leprechaun ears, and my mom picked me up, and I was just crying and crying and crying, and the Montessori school teacher, my teacher, Miss Kelly, I remember her name, Miss Kelly, she was like, Clarke has just been crying since we've been doing crafts, and I don't know what's wrong. And my mom, of course, was like, well, what's wrong? And I said, my ears. And she didn't know what I was, but she's like, oh no, she must have an ear infection. Like, what's happening? Because I got sick a lot when I was a kid. I had strep all the time, I had ear infections. I was an accident-prone child. So she's like, oh no, she must have an ear infection. What's going on? And she goes, honey, what's wrong with your ears? Like, do they hurt? What's wrong? I said, no, my ears, they won't stay on. And so I was putting my little crown type, headdress thing on, and it kept popping off because my curls would like push the leprechaun ears off my head. And I said, I just want blonde, straight hair. I just want blonde, straight hair. So I was crying because I just wanted these ears to stay on. And it's so interesting that as a kid, that's what I, assimilated to these leprechaun ears staying on my head with blonde, straight hair, because that's what a lot of my classmates had. And so, of course, my mom is kind of like, oh no, like, all right, we have to get ready to, at 4 or 5 years old, have this conversation with my daughter about, how her hair is beautiful and how, who she is beautiful. And so finally, I think my mom was like, here. And so she took like a stapler and she just made the little headband thing just like a little bit bigger, and then it stayed on, and my life was all sunshine and rainbows after that. So that's all I cared about. I just wanted my leprechaun ears to stay on. So after that, I remember that instant, but I don't so much remember any conversation that came from it or really having the understanding that race was a factor. I just knew that I wanted my leprechaun ears to stay on, and the people whose leprechaun ears stayed on were, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white kids in my class. And so I would say that was probably my first instance without even recognizing that underlying standard of beauty even. So growing up, going into elementary school, so I went to Oakview Elementary, which was not too far down the road, which was also in Maple Grove. So I was in elementary school. The awesome thing was the year, so like 2001 I was in first grade. So it's really easy to keep track of. Wow. So 2001 I was in first grade through 2006, sixth grade. So I would say I had probably as quote unquote normal of a childhood as, like, I wouldn't trade my childhood for anything. Me and my friends just would run around, and we were just happy, and, you know, our parents always supported our creativity, so we would get ourselves into some pretty dumb stuff by, you know, making tree forts and hanging stuff and making zip lines in our backyard that could never hold our weight and, like, all that kind of stuff. So we had a very adventurous childhood. And, yeah, like, we lived in such a safe space that we would just bike around everywhere. Oh my gosh, we would go everywhere without parent supervision, and we were just, you know, we just knew we were safe, and everybody knew that we would be safe. And so I really had the rose-colored goggles on super tight, even through, I would even say through junior high. And so I went to Maple Grove Junior High. And that would have been, because they do 3 years, it was 7th, 8th, and 9th, Maple Grove Middle School now, but when I was there, it was the junior high. And so, really the biggest thing for me when I was in junior high was I had this community of friends that I had grown up with, and most of them didn't look like me. When growing up, it was pretty white. Everybody around me was still pretty white. I had friends from all backgrounds, and that was something that my parents instilled in me. You know, I grew up where family isn't just by blood. Family is the people we love and the people we bring into our homes and our hearts and our lives. And even if it's my dad always says you have friends for a season, reason, or lifetime. And so he goes, you know, of course we want to hold on to friends for a lifetime, but sometimes those people can just impact us so powerfully for a season or a reason. And we'll need them and they need us. And so, growing up, you know, a lot of my friends' families felt the same way. So I had friends that were, you know, military brats that moved around from everywhere and saw everything. And I had friends that, you know, are still in their childhood homes as well, and their families are not planning on moving anytime soon. And so it was a mixed bag of experiences, but we were all just kids. And, you know, the only thing we cared about is if that boy liked us, or if, you know, what were you wearing to school that day so you could match. So that's, like, all I can remember really from my, like, elementary school to, you know, junior high experience was, you know, we just cared about who was the fastest on the track team and, you know, did you get your homework done? I'm super stuck and lost. And so, I never really experienced much racial disparity from that, except for I never saw any leadership that looked like me. I never saw any teachers that looked like me, other than my dad being a teacher. So I knew they existed. So it was, you know, to me, I was just like, oh, okay, I don't have anybody in my school. That's it. But, you know, of course it was really the only quote unquote racist accounts that I would have is any time that we would talk about slavery during history class, everybody would look at me and my friends or, you know, whatever that might be, but that was kind of it. And being kids, it wasn't like we really had the vocabulary to talk about it or even the emotional intelligence yet to understand where this is coming from or why the kids would look at us or why the teachers would be asking like, oh, so Clarke, do you have anything to say on this? Or, oh, Diamond, do you have anything to add to, you know, the slavery topic? We're just sitting here like, this is our first time learning about it too. What do you have to say? You know?
Right.
So, like, you're the teacher, teach us. So, it wasn't until junior high that I had, my first black teacher. And her and I just didn't get along. You know, it was just one of those situations that no matter what, you know, I could fly over the moon and she would kind of roll her eyes. You can't please everybody, you know? So, but we saw each other, in a school where a majority of the students didn't look like us, didn't have, the same barriers that we had. And the fact that she was the first teacher that I was like, oh, wow, hey, a black teacher. It's not like a white student that walks in and goes, hey, oh, my gosh, a white teacher. Like, that's just what you expect. So, but anywho, I guess I would say, like, education-wise, I had great schooling. I cared more about, as you can tell, I'm a talker, so I cared more about my social life. Exactly. Not so great on my report cards, but I saw a meme the other day that said if you got she likes to talk a lot on your report card, you're a boss lady now, which, you know, I like to count myself as boss lady, so. But so I was a socialite, and all I cared about was friends. And so going from junior high, so this would have been 2009, to high school, going to Osseo, Maple Grove Junior High, or Maple Grove Middle School now, it splits. So Osseo, Osseo, I'm going to keep using junior high because I keep getting mixed up, but Osseo Junior High, Maple Grove Junior High, and Park Center Junior High are all in the same district, the Osseo School District. And so when we would move from junior high, which was based on proximity, and so was high school, but what would end up happening is a lot of us would get split up. So I was really only upset because most of my friends were going to go to Maple Grove. And I just wanted to stay with my friends. But in the long run, I'm super glad that I didn't beg my parents super hard to transfer me. Maple Grove is a predominantly white high school. The Maple Grove neighborhoods are notoriously like wealthier neighborhoods, definitely middle class, upper middle class. And so I ended up going, so I was district for Osseo, which is kind of, we have just like this weird little like bubble in Plymouth that goes to Osseo. So I'm only 3 minutes away from Wayzata High School. I'm only like 5 minutes away from Armstrong High School, which are both in like, also in the Plymouth district. But I'm 15 minutes away from Osseo, and that's just the way that the district zoning went. So Osseo, when I was attending, was 51% other. And so I got to have this really unique experience of literally 50-50, of students that look like me, teachers and faculty that look like me, people that didn't look like us and had a super different point of views. And so I would say at that age, Osseo was the closest thing to a real world experience that I had ever experienced in my lifetime. So this was 10 to 2013, because I graduated in 2013, was being in high school. And that is when a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm sure even cognitively in high school is when you start to actually understand, like comprehend these things too. So the microaggressions were just out the window, with being mixed and experiencing favoritism, fetishization, and colorism that benefited me, right? And being, yes, it was 51% other, but you could still feel just that, the otherness. My senior year of high school, so it would have been 2012 to 2013, we ended up actually having a race war at the school. And so at Osseo, what I love about Osseo is you get every walk of life. I had a friend that for half of our sophomore year, her and her family lived in their car. And then I'd have friends that were living in mansions. Like, it's, you know, you want to talk about the diaspora. We had refugees that attended our school. We had, you know, kids of very wealthy, predominant, you know, positions of power that were attending my school, and everything in between. And so you started to see some of the learned stuff from parents, and you started to see us forming our own opinions, but still within the lens of where parents have showed us what are the suburbs, you know, still, of course, and America deem as, you know, more valuable or whatever it may be. And so having that race war my senior year was eye-opening. It alerted me to a lot of not only my mixedness, but my blackness. Unfortunately, a lot of just through our history and the way that Black Americans are being conditioned to, you know, that kind of, like, I hate to say it, but crabs in a bucket mentality is unfortunately a lot of my, you know, peers. It was a situation of they had to win or no one could win. And being in a predominantly white space that, you know, I guess would quote unquote have proved itself, because you see these successful, you know, white families that very much, you know, are living that whole, like, yeah, you can be the only one that wins, that winning very kind of like one-off, individualistic versus communal kind of outlook or approach on things. Unfortunately, it ended up feeling a lot of pull and tension even within the Black community. We had some very wealthy, you know, Black families also that went to our school, and some, you know, kids that their only meal was when they were at school. And so even seeing a lot of that disparity and a lot of that, I mean, for me and just through my experience and as I grow, what I'm noticing is basically these white ideals, right, of like living up to this white standard and having whiteness, basically. You could see that, how that was ingrained even in the Black community at our school. And so when this race war ended up breaking out, because there's just a predominant, a pretty affluential, I would say, white student at our school had said some really racist, really just prejudiced, like awful things that just ignited this anger that has.
Did you
has
say
been
it to a fellow student?
Yes, unfortunately, it was to and about a fellow student. Unfortunately, it was the whole family. So it was like a brother and a sister duo that were just ultimately terrorizing, unfortunately, this young Black man. I guess so. The youngest, just to kind of sum it up, the younger sister had dated this Black man, and which wasn't uncommon in our school. You know, it was pretty common thing. A lot of interracial couples, or, you know, couples from very different backgrounds and having relationships. And so that wasn't the problem. The problem was when they broke up, she started dating this guy on the lacrosse team who was notoriously racist, who came from a notoriously prejudiced family. And so the fact that when she started dating him and then started saying all of these, oh my gosh, just the worst things about my friend, people were fed up. And so it's kind of basically what's going on today is either people had to pick a side. Were you going to support your friend and, you know, this really insensitive, racist, dumb stuff that they are spreading and saying? Or are you going to be on the side of justice of, you can't say those things and be able to get away with it. There's nothing okay with that. That comes from a history of oppression. That comes from a history of privilege. That comes with so much damaging and lasting effects that clearly are still around today because of where they stem from and come from. So it ended up being really interesting. And so here I am, as a light-skinned mixed black woman, the brother got to a point where he's just like, I can't deal with this anymore. And so he comes up to me and is like, can you talk to the other black students and tell them da-da-da? And I'm like, no, you have to go talk to them. I am not your saving grace. I am not your bridge of communication. Like, I was like, no.
Right.
And so that was really the first time experiencing a lot of that, and unfortunately, it stirred, it's kind of stirred the pot in my friend group, in my black friend group of, well, why would he come and talk to you? You have nothing to do with this. That black enough narrative, it ended up opening up just a real ugly, sad can of worms that my dad and I, we talk a lot about of who is this narrative serving, who benefits from the colorism conversation, who benefits from racial oppression and racism and, the systemic racism, and it's white people. And so I'm constantly asking, even my fellow black friends, my fellow black, indigenous, and people of color friends of like, hey, these prejudices and biases that we even have within a community, who does that serve? And so it was super eye-opening when in high school, my senior year at that. And then I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm going to graduate. And then I took myself to South Dakota, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah, well, that kind of leads me into my next question. Dealing with growing up biracial in Plymouth, and then just trying to find outlets. Did you ever find places where you could, experience black culture or history, or do you feel like you had to, maybe it was later in life that you started exploring that?
Yeah, no, that's a super good question. When growing up, especially growing up mixed, there was a lot of overcompensation, especially when I got to high school and I started seeing a lot of my other mixed friends start being accepted more into, I guess I would say, for lack of a better term, like they were accepted more for being black. And growing up in the suburbs, I was very much too white for the black kids, but then still too black for the white kids. So there was a lot of overcompensation that ended up happening. All of a sudden I was like, since most of my friends did end up going to Maple Grove, so, I did get to start fresh. I did get to make new friends. I was a part of the volleyball team, which our volleyball team was just like our school. It's like 50-50. Still a predominantly white sport, but it was still like I got to be on a team of people, and we were all there for volleyball and there to win. So we had that commonality and that there, but being able to then start having more black friends and seeing more of, I would say the black diaspora, if you will, of like, being a refugee up to being a very wealthy black family. I had friends across the board, and so I was so fortunate, and I still am so fortunate that I get to experience all of that, because it's true. It's like the black experience is not linear. There's no monolithic black experience. And so I was lucky with Osseo. I do not believe if I went to any other school, maybe other than my dad's high school or maybe Armstrong, would I have been able to experience that diaspora of blackness. Because if my parents would have let me go to Maple Grove, I have friends, my black friends from junior high that went there said it was miserable. It was living in whiteness and living in fear, and constant microaggression, I wouldn't say constant outward racism, but I mean, like, you can see how the system was not built to benefit them at any point. They were surviving, not learning while in education. And even though they were growing up, you know, in very similar areas to where I was, it just shows you that a system that, you know, our education system and the way it's built, even though blackness isn't so much deemed as blackness in the suburbs because of, you know, this quote unquote black ideal or the idea of blackness that America has instilled is like, oh, well, you're not, you know, you're not black. You know what I mean? Because you're living out in the suburbs and you're living in whiteness. But our institution of education is showing you how, like, our history books are whitewashed like crazy. Our, you know, the system is set up for these kids to survive, not thrive. And that's even in the suburbs, not just inner city schools, not just, you know, rural schools. Like, black students in America are there to survive, not to thrive. That's what they've built this institution around. And so, there's a lot of that, but, I feel like I totally lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, that makes sense because I was going to say, so so you're talking especially about how, you know, the history books across, you know, the burbs, across the cities, across America were whitewashed.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you had to go outside of school and maybe even, to kind of find that Black culture, Black history, and did that happen later in life, or is that something you started looking into in high school?
That's right. Okay. So, once my dad can tell that my sister and I were at a higher, you know, emotional intellect, as well as, you know, good old higher IQ as our brains develop as we get older, our cognitive ability, is when we did start to have a little bit more of those, a little bit of the conversation. My dad very much raised this. He goes, I didn't want to tell you my Black experience because I knew. He's like, not only being mixed women, but even just being women, growing up where we're growing up. He's like, I wanted you to have your own experience. And so once we were older and even, you know, in high school, like, I didn't care. Like, I was just like, I just want to graduate. I want to play volleyball. I want to graduate. I want to just have boyfriends and hang out with my friends and text people all the time. So, you know, the fact that our textbooks were whitewashed, or, you know, my dad, I would come home and I would be working with him, like, say, on a history project, or I would start asking about something. Of course, then he would start getting in his history bag and how our you know, our history being whitewashed and all this kind of stuff. But I was like rolling my eyes like, Dad, I just need to get this paper done. Like, I was like, I just want to get this paper done so I can go watch TV. Like, I didn't come up here for an Afrocentric lecture. So, you know, growing up, just being a young American, I didn't care. I see a lot of these kids nowadays that care. They want the right education. They want the truth. They want the social justice. And I envy them, but it warms my heart because they are the future. And so, I mean, there's part of me that's like, I'm sad that I had that ignorance because, you know, kids are truly the future. They're the only thing that's going to carry us beyond. And so I'm mad at my ignorance, but really with where my racial journey started was a lot of colorism and tokenism that ended up happening in high school. With, you know, even my Black friends telling me like how beautiful my light skin was, how, you know, beautiful my looser curls are, and, you know, starting to see, you know, because this is when Instagram really kind of started too, so starting to actually see more people that look like me, but then started coming with this tag of fetishization that has happened with, I would say, all Black, Indigenous, and people of color, especially women. A lot of the fetishization that lies underneath that. Well, when I was in college was really when I started diving more into my identity and doing that work. And so I went to South Dakota State University out in Brookings, South Dakota. The first week I was on campus, I got called the N-word.
Wow.
With my redheaded roommate from Mankato, Minnesota. So she was more vocally upset. I was definitely in shock, I mean, you hear about these things, and I kind of like, it's almost like I expected this to happen, but the fact that it actually happened my first week on campus was eye-opening, and it opened my soul. And so I made it through school about 3 months, so like my first semester, and I came home, and I was like, I can't do it. I can't be here. This isn't meant for me. And my dad, we always called him Coach Sanders because he very much coached us through life. He said, do you want to make a difference not only in your life but others? And I said, yeah, that's why I'm getting a higher education. That's why I'm going into marketing, because I want to support. I got my degree in marketing because I wanted to be behind the work to make sure that there was representation going into communities and proper representation. And I said, yeah. And he goes, those people that call you that and those people that don't want you there are the ones that need you there. And he says, as Sanders, we make differences in people's lives. So he goes, I want you to stick it out. Just stick it out for a little bit. He's like, you can start gathering your options, do whatever you want to do, but they need you more than you need them. And he goes, and that's I think, going to be really important for you, as in me. So I ended up sticking it out. We had a multicultural center in the basement of our student union. So very much out of sight, out of mind. So I went down there one day because I found like a college kind of like exchange program where I could go to other schools but get credit for my school. I don't know, it was funky. But the guy who was the director of it, his name was Carl Douglas, Mr. CD. He, black man, the first, I'll put this out there too, the first black man other than a student that I saw in Brookings, South Dakota. So I walked down there. I walk into the Multicultural Center, and this is one of the first times. So this is my second semester of college. This would have been 2014. I walked downstairs into the Multicultural Center, which I had never seen or heard of before, and there they were, all the black students. I'm like, I instantaneously felt at home. Oh my gosh, I'm like getting all warm and fuzzy thinking about it again. I didn't feel alone anymore in this literally a sea of white faces that did not want me there. Outright, said it to our faces plenty of times. They did not want us there. Unless we were there for sports, there was no reason that there should ever be any black people on campus. We were profit, right? Like, it was still very much viewed that way. So, sitting down with CD, I was looking at transferring to, oh my gosh, what's the college in Normal, Illinois? I think it's like Illinois State or something like that. So I'm over here because I've always wanted to live in Chicago. Still on my list of to-dos. But he said, hang out down here. Get to meet other students that are like you. He's like, do you have classes the rest of the day? I said, no. He said, just hang out down here. They had a TV. They had a computer lab. He's like, do some homework. Because there weren't a lot of students down there. But all of a sudden it was like on the dot when classes got out. And all of a sudden, like, here are all these black and brown students and Native American students and, like, people where I was like, holy crap, like, they feel it too. But they're still here, and they're pushing through. And so finding my community at SDSU was an adventure. She ended up being my roommate for last 2 years of college. She's still a good friend of mine, Tiona, who's from Chicago, who is also mixed. She's older than me, so she took me under her wing and basically saved me from leaving, from missing out on opportunity, from straight up, I changed the narrative of that school. I helped bring the Multicultural Center out of the basement to the main level. I was able to work on different boards and be on hiring teams to make sure we had more diverse faculty. But then, was talking about them not only the hiring process, but the retention process at the school. I got to work at admissions. and I started seeing more faces that look like mine, and I got to give tours to people that look like me, and I started to diversify this school that would very much otherwise be completely ostracized. And still to this day, I'm almost like having a light bulb moment when talking about this. It was like, my dad was right. They needed me more than I needed them, but I needed them to need me. And which has opened my eyes to the possibilities that we as BIPOC individuals have, the power that us Black folks have. Going to South Dakota was, though one of the most painful things, was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me too.
Yeah. And then traveling back in time to Plymouth, and this is my last question for you, but how would you just sum up, or what would you even want to say to people about what it was like, you know, just kind of a last remark about what it was like growing up Black in the suburbs?
Yeah. I'm trying to make sure that like I can try to articulate this as best I can.
Yeah, that's kind of a big general sweeping question, but what would you want people to know about your experience?
So, Blackness in the suburbs is a very nuanced thing, and I know saying that is super vague, but it truly, it's truly, it is vague. It's just that it's vague. Of, you know, we are the exception to the rule for a lot of these white folks of, see, you can have what we have. There's no racism. These things aren't happening around us. So there's a lot of blindness in the suburbs. I would say there's great opportunity because at least I'm very fortunate in where I grew up and the people I've been surrounded by, and also being intentional about who I surround myself with. Of 99% of the people in my life especially that I keep in my life, are all very open-minded. And, you know, if you tell them, you know, how the beauty and the life that they live out here in Deckland, Plymouth, of just the sheer comfort that they get to experience is something that we want everyone to experience. And that's based on that, you know, that's just making sure that the opportunities are there, that the barriers aren't there. That's where the system comes into place. But yet something that I would even just, I don't want to say like caution my Black constituents, but, you know, just almost a reminder is we're still in America. And there's still redlining, you know, there's these things. I don't know if Plymouth so much, I haven't done enough like housing research in the area, but, you know, these things are still there. There are still people that are going to stand in their window and watch you walk up the street to your friend's house. Suburbs, here's a sweeping statement. The suburbs is the land of microaggression. They won't fight for you, but they'll pat you on the back and say they're there for you. You know what I mean? I would say that the suburbs are dangerous in a very their own unique way. Of a lot of my Black friends and Black neighbors. I don't want to say that because there's so much nuance in the Black community that once you kind of have this whiteness that you know, all of a sudden, like, or have any sort of wealth or monetary type privilege, that you forget where you came from, quote unquote. But there are a lot of primarily, I found this with a lot of older Black men, is that once they're comfortable, they get to be comfortable, that they're able to make that switch for themselves to become comfortable. And comfort often means, at least for me, a lack of progress. And so they're okay with those microaggressions. They're okay with their neighbors, you know, writing down every time they take a walk around their neighborhood. But we can't escape, even in our homes, even going into our own homes, we can't escape that institutional racism, systemic racism that still exists. And I'm sure that, though my dad didn't tell me a lot of the reason why he didn't go along for a lot of the house hunting process, was because he didn't want my mom to experience any of the redlining experience or a lot of the looks or those types of things. I think it was his way of almost like protecting her to make sure that she got to get exactly what she wanted without him hindering her. So, yeah, my biggest takeaway would be it is just the land of microaggression.
I like that phrase. Well, Clarke, I want to thank you so much for your time, and I will be in touch.
Well, thank you, Jojo, and thank you so much. These types of projects are so important. Like I was saying, the diaspora of Blackness is not linear. Like, there's not one Black American experience, and I'm love that you're taking initiative and doing these projects because they're so important.
Yeah. I think I obviously agree with you on that part. So thank you so much, and I'll be in touch.